Welcome back to the channel, The Daily Scoop. Today we're diving into a topic that blends humor, honesty, curiosity, and a bit of philosophical reflection. We're talking about Jon Stewart, his approach to faith, his thoughts on religion, and the way he frames belief, skepticism, and morality on The Daily Show. Jon Stewart has always had a unique way of bringing depth into comedic conversations, and his reflections on faith are no exception. So let's explore how he thinks about these things, why his perspective matters, and what makes his approach resonate with so many people. Jon Stewart has never claimed to be deeply religious, nor has he positioned himself as someone who rejects spirituality outright. His tone usually sits somewhere in the middle. He often acknowledges that he was raised within a cultural Jewish background, but he's also been open about questioning religious doctrine, organized faith structures, and the ways religion is used in politics. The interesting part is that he never approaches the topic with hostility. Instead, he uses humor, context, and curiosity to explore how faith influences the world and how people use it to justify their behaviors. One thing that stands out is how Jon speaks about faith not as a single rigid concept, but as a spectrum of ideas. He often discusses how belief systems can help individuals find purpose, comfort, and community. When he talks about his own upbringing, he describes it more as a cultural identity than a spiritual commitment. He doesn't romanticize religion, but he doesn't dismiss its historical and emotional value either. This middle ground perspective helps make his commentary accessible to people from all backgrounds. Another key part of Jon Stewart's approach is how he contrasts personal faith with organized religion. He frequently highlights how political leaders weaponize faith to push agendas that do not align with the compassionate ideals religions claim to stand for. When he critiques faith-based hypocrisy, it's not about mocking belief itself. It's about exposing the inconsistency between preaching love and practicing exclusion. He often uses satire to reveal contradictions, especially when public figures cite religious values selectively. Jon also talks about how he's constantly questioning things. That's one of the core elements of his personality, and it reflects his stance on faith too. He acknowledges that he doesn't have all the answers. He jokes about the mystery of existence, the uncertainty of life, and the impossibility of fully understanding the universe. This humility in not knowing is something he frames as natural. Instead of pretending certainty, he embraces doubt as a normal human condition. When Jon Stewart discusses morality, he frequently uncouples it from religion. He suggests that people can be ethical without subscribing to a formal belief system. He argues that empathy, kindness, and fairness are not exclusively religious values, they're human values. He pushes back against the idea that morality requires religious backing. In his view, doing good should come from compassion rather than fear of punishment or promise of reward. Throughout his time on The Daily Show, Jon used humor to break down complex topics, including belief systems. He often blends sincerity with jokes, shifting effortlessly between serious commentary and comedic delivery. This balance allows him to talk about faith without alienating viewers. He recognizes that religion can be deeply personal, so he approaches it with a sense of respect even when he's making sharp critiques. Jon Stewart also acknowledges the good that religion can do. He's spoken about how communities rooted in faith can be sources of support, charity, and solidarity. At the same time, he doesn't shy away from addressing the harm that can be done when belief systems are used as tools of power. He often critiques extremism, intolerance, and dogmatism, not the idea of faith itself. That distinction is a major reason why people across different beliefs appreciate his perspective. Another interesting aspect of his commentary is how he views the relationship between science and faith. Jon tends to lean towards scientific explanations for understanding the world. He advocates for facts, evidence, and reason, but he also acknowledges that science doesn't replace the emotional or existential needs that people fulfill through faith. He sees these two things not necessarily as enemies, but as frameworks serving different purposes. Science explains how things work. Faith can help explain how people feel. Jon's comedic background gives him a unique lens, especially when touching on religious debates. His humor often reveals the absurdity in how society treats certain faith-based issues, whether he's pointing out inconsistencies in political arguments or highlighting the exaggerated fears some groups push. His comedy functions as a tool to spark thought. He invites viewers to question what they hear, analyze the logic behind it, and recognize when religion is misused for influence. When Jon Stewart describes his own identity, he tends to lean on cultural connection more than religious devotion. For him, being Jewish is tied to heritage, history, and storytelling. It's less about rituals and more about the shared experience of a community. He talks about the humor, resilience, and traditions that shaped him, but he doesn't claim to be strictly observant. Instead, he positions himself as someone who appreciates the cultural richness without necessarily engaging in traditional religious practice. At the same time, Jon doesn't dismiss the idea of spirituality altogether. He hints at the possibility that there might be something beyond what we understand, but he doesn't pretend to know what that is. He approaches spirituality with modesty. He values wonder and curiosity, but avoids claiming certainty. This openness is a core part of his philosophy. Rather than choosing between absolute belief or absolute disbelief, he remains comfortable in the space of not knowing. Jon often uses satire to highlight how religion intersects with American culture. He critiques how political debates frequently invoke religious language, even when discussing topics unrelated to spiritual belief. He finds humor in the way politicians try to appear morally superior by attaching themselves to religious symbols. He exposes how selective morality becomes convenient when religious values are used as political tools. Through his commentary, he encourages viewers to look beyond rhetoric and examine actions. Another recurring theme in Jon's commentary is the importance of questioning authority. He views critical thinking as essential, especially when dealing with powerful institutions. Religion, like politics, can accumulate power, and with power comes the risk of abuse. Jon argues that questioning isn't disrespectful, it's responsible. Blind faith, whether in political leaders or spiritual ones, can lead to dangerous outcomes. His satire works to challenge complacency and encourage independent thought. Jon Stewart also recognizes the emotional side of faith. He acknowledges that many people find comfort in prayer, rituals, and the idea of something greater than themselves. He doesn't belittle these feelings. Instead, he emphasizes that meaning is personal. What gives one person strength might not resonate with another, and that's okay. He highlights that diversity of belief is normal and valuable. His message often focuses on coexistence rather than conformity. When discussing religious differences, Jon often brings humor as a connecting thread. Comedy becomes a bridge between perspectives. He uses shared laughter to reduce tension around difficult topics. This ability to discuss sensitive subjects without hostility is one of his greatest strengths. He invites viewers to see the humor in human contradictions, including those related to faith. Jon also critiques media portrayals of religion. He often points out how the news amplifies extremes, creating misleading impressions of religious communities. He argues that moderate voices often get overshadowed by sensational stories. Through satire, he pushes back against exaggerated stereotypes and encourages more balanced understanding. This perspective helps viewers recognize nuances that the media sometimes ignores. A big part of Jon Stewart's approach is acknowledging human imperfection. He doesn't pretend that people, religious or not, are flawless. He frequently jokes about his own shortcomings, turning vulnerability into relatability. This openness makes his reflections on faith feel genuine. Viewers can sense that he's not trying to preach or convert. He's simply exploring ideas with honesty and humor. Jon Stewart's commentary on faith also reflects his view on community. He often emphasizes that what truly matters is how people treat one another. Whether or not someone believes in a higher power, kindness is universal. He highlights that compassion, fairness, and justice are values everyone can practice regardless of belief system. This inclusive message is central to his philosophy. Another important point he makes is about the role of doubt. Rather than seeing doubt as a weakness, Jon sees it as part of the human experience. Doubt encourages reflection, sparks dialogue, and prevents dogmatic thinking. He often jokes that certainty is overrated. By embracing doubt, he shows that it's possible to live ethically even without answers to life's biggest mysteries. Jon Stewart also talks about responsibility. He argues that people shouldn't rely on faith alone to justify their actions. Regardless of belief, individuals have responsibility for how they behave. He urges people to think critically, act ethically, and hold themselves accountable. This message appears repeatedly in his commentary, tying together his thoughts on faith, politics, and morality. Jon often critiques leaders who use faith as a shield against criticism. He finds humor in how some public figures invoke religious language to excuse unethical decisions. He exposes contradictions by using satire to reveal the gap between words and actions. This approach resonates with audiences because it promotes integrity and transparency. Throughout his career, Jon Stewart has encouraged people to seek truth, challenge assumptions, and remain open-minded. His reflections on faith reflect these broader themes. He doesn't demand that viewers adopt his perspective. Instead, he invites them to question, explore, and form their own conclusions. His goal is not to provide answers, but to spark curiosity. At the heart of Jon's philosophy is the belief that humanity matters more than ideology. Whether someone is religious, spiritual, agnostic, or skeptical, what truly defines them is how they treat others. His commentary encourages empathy and understanding across different worldviews. He uses humor to show that despite differing beliefs, people share common hopes, fears, and values. When Jon Stewart talks about religion, he often brings up the idea of humility. He argues that humans should recognize the limits of their understanding. Whether someone believes in a divine plan or a chaotic universe, there's always more to learn. This humility fosters tolerance. It helps people respect others' perspectives even when they disagree. Throughout his time on The Daily Show, Jon demonstrated how comedy can be a powerful tool for exploring serious subjects. His discussions about faith